Alan also alluded to something that unfortunately I've been involved in here recently with anybody that represents medical marijuana patients knows you're representing people that are viewed as second-class citizens at best. And one of the situations I find incredibly troubling right now is this transplant issue. I had a client named Timothy Guerin, who was a Seattle musician and who was a medical marijuana patient. He was a Hep C patient. And he was using medical marijuana under his doctor's care to treat his hepatitis C. When he went to, when he got busted for growing his own medical marijuana, he was already beginning to get into the transplant programs at 2 different places. When he got busted, I started to assist him in this process, which became absurd and Kafkaesque in the extreme. Tim Guerin basically, and this may be the only time I think this is true, but I think marijuana finally did kill somebody, because Tim Guerin was refused a liver. He was refused to even be put on the transplant list because he was a medical marijuana patient. I had an experience here that was unique, I think, I haven't heard any other lawyers have this experience. But I dealt directly with the doctors. I was like in the hospital room with the doctor when they came in and told us the first time that they'd consider putting him on the transplant list if he went to 60 days of inpatient drug treatment. They hadn't even done an assessment on him. They hadn't even determined that he had a drug problem. He, in fact, did not have a drug problem. But because marijuana was involved, got to have drug treatment. Didn't even have him assessed or anything. So the committee makes their decision. I'm in the room with them when they tell them, no, you got to go through drug treatment. I told the doctor, I said, this is ridiculous. This man is going to die within 2 weeks. You know, you want him to go through 60 days of drug treatment? This is insane. You know, I'm going to do everything I can. That's when I started calling every reporter I knew and begging them to pick up the story, and I started calling doctors I knew, and can we do something about this? And you know what? Ran out of time. Ran out of time. I got it reconsidered, got the transplant committee at the University of Washington to reconsider, you know, but they came back and said no again. Again, I was in the room and they said no again. They said, well, we just don't believe that we can give you a good outcome, Mr. Guerin. It's like, Tim looks at him and goes, well, I'm going to die. I'm like, this is not a fucking good outcome. But it was the outcome. I was there a week later when he died at the wonderful Bailey Blaché house in Seattle. He's dead. He died because it wouldn't put him on the transplant list. Pure and simple. He was the #1 candidate for a liver. He was that sick. He would have been #1 with a bullet. But they wouldn't even put him on the fucking list because of medical marijuana. Because of concerns about aspergillus and things that they just pulled out of the air. But what it really was it was a moral, you know, just a star chamber is what it really is. It's just, if you are, you know, counterculture, or you're you're using non-standard medical treatments, or you've got a history of drug abuse, or you've got a history of alcohol abuse, they don't want you in their transplant programs. There's a shortage of organs, and they are playing God with who gets one. Now, I've got another guy who's not as sick, and I had started to help him first. His name is Jonathan Simchen. You may have read about him. The LA Times did a little thing about him. And I'm going to be going to bat for Jonathan. If anybody has any bright ideas about how to sue, help me out on this one. I'm open to ideas. But I am going to sue him on John Simchen's behalf, and we are going to get that policy changed. And John Simchen, who needs a kidney, is fucking going to get a kidney if I have to kill somebody at the University of Washington to get him one.
It's not an option just to stop using for a while?
Well, you know, Simchen, what they did with Simchen was really ridiculous, because he was accepted into the transplant program, and he'd been in it for almost a year, and he's working his way up the list, he's working towards getting his transplant, and he was getting sick, he was having problems dealing with his kidney disease, so he went to a doctor and he said, I'll try some medical marijuana. Wow, it really worked for him, and he started really responding to dialysis, and a lot of other good things started happening for him, started getting healthier. He thought this was a good thing, so he decided to share that with the folks at Virginia Mason Medical Center in Seattle. And they promptly kicked him off the transplant list. They said, you're using medical marijuana, oh my God, it's a street drug, we're not having anything to do with that, we're out of here, you're out of our program, we don't want to talk to you again, blah, blah, blah. That's when I got involved with Jonathan. This predated Timothy. And I said to them, wait a minute, He's an approved patient with a qualifying condition under state law, pursuant to his doctor's recommendation. You can't do this to him. They said, yes, we can. We're private. We don't care. Go fuck yourself. Go to the University of Washington, where they'll be more sympathetic to your liberal ideas. That's what they told me when I called up to try and help Jonathan. I put Jonathan on the back burner for Tim because Tim was going to die real fast, and he did. Jonathan is healthier, and he's doing okay on dialysis 3 times a week, and we're going to try and get him in. When we went to the University of Washington, they said again, flat out, no, medical marijuana, you're not coming here. It's a street drug, it's a drug of abuse, you have a problem, we're not dealing with it.
It's not an option for him to stop using for. I represent a guy in Oregon who got visited, and he had, you know, in Oregon we've got a firm limitation on the number of plants, and there is no affirmative defense.
Which sucks.
If you're over, and he had a couple of plants that were a little too tall. And there was a delay in the prosecution a couple of years. He's a kidney patient who he stopped using. They put him on this other medication. His health has clearly declined. I mean, he's not doing well.
Right.
But he's on the fucking transplant.
Let's make you sicker.
He's on the fucking transplant list. And the prosecutor dismissed his case in part because there was this series of clean UAs for a period of time. I'm just asking.
Well,
isn't that a strategy? Not in the guy's case who died, but the guy's case who's alive.
The guy who died had quit. He had quit. I mean, I failed to mention that little punchline for you, but the guy who died had quit using.
And they still wanted him to do.
And they wanted him to be 6 months at Harborview when I went there to try and get Tim Liver at Harborview before we went to the University of Washington. They told me he has to be 6 months. Dr. Schuhart, there, very compassionate lady, told me, I'm sorry, I won't even put his paperwork in until he's 6 months free of marijuana. He's got to be 6 months clean. I said, okay, we did a little fudging around. We got him. You know, April 1st was going to be the deadline. But I mean, I'm watching the guy die. Right? I'm watching the guy become toxic. You know, I'm begging them to do something, and they're not going to do it. And quitting's not an option for Simchen now because they won't take him back in the program anyway. And they wanted him to go through drug treatment too. You know, medical marijuana is real. It works for people. It saves people's lives, period. When you're using it under a doctor's recommendation pursuant to state law like you are in my state, the people wanted that to happen. I don't think anybody that voted for a medical marijuana law in Washington State foresaw this kind of bullshit was going to happen to people because of it. And what they're doing is flat wrong, period, flat wrong.